just want to thank you for all the research and everything that you've done. I'm a primary school teacher and I'm with a mum here, and we sort of lived through having to see children masked or being taught by staff in masks. I'm a primary school teacher, I refuse to wear one, and we certainly stood up for a lot of children who were deaf or autistic spectrum or English as a second language. And we wrote to every head teacher in Scotland as a group. We started a campaign group. We did lots of protests, but we wrote to every head teacher of high schools in Scotland, and we quoted a lot of what you said to say, look, you know, we sort of were getting a bit fed up with the politicians. We had two that were supportive. One because his nieces weren't learning at school because they couldn't hear and they couldn't see what the teacher was saying, so they learnt nothing, he said, for a year and a half, and another who was himself disabled and had a bit more empathy. But my question is really, we in Scotland had to endure a lot more than in England of masking, and there was a lot more compliance. I was the only teacher in my school who didn't wear a mask. So what I want to ask you is, why were there so few scientists like yourselves that were speaking out? I mean, certainly I know in my union, it was very pro-mask and the peer pressure was enormous. But I think we really struggled to find people in Scotland who would speak out, who were in positions like yourself. So we were so grateful we found you. And I just want to say, why are you different? What makes people like you?
Right.
You know, and why are there not more in a, you know, scientific community, which is, science is all about asking questions, isn't it? And debating and having different perspectives and evidence and all of that sort of stuff.
Okay, thank you.
So that's my question, basically.
Okay.
But I wanted to thank you just on behalf of the group, really.
Well, in answer to the question about why people like me speaking up, probably the most obvious and perhaps the biggest reason is that we were retired. I think, to be fair, you know, people who were still working on the front line, whether it was in education or whether it was in health, where the blob, the establishment, the right way of thinking was completely pro-narrative, all this collectivism stuff as well. You had to be hugely brave to stick your head above the parapet. You know, the level of censorship was off the scale, the level of smearing was off the scale, cancellation off the scale, the risk of losing your job for speaking out was very real. I know there's people in here tonight who've had personal experience of that. So I think that's the main reason why, you know, people like me were speaking out. And if you look at the sceptical groups, they are disproportionately represented by people, I think, who have either reached retirement or have moved out of the mainstream section, moved out to mainstream academia or mainstream health. Yeah, those are the people that speak out. So I think that's the key reason. And I kind of understand it. You know, I often reflect on that. I often think, you know, when I worked in the health service, I was gobby then, to be fair. I used to be always arguing with psychiatrists about, you know, the best way to approach human distress. You know, they were saying, oh, it's all down to biochemicals in the brain. I was saying, no, it isn't, you know. And I used to be quite, you know, gobby. And psychiatry was powerful and still is in the mental health field. But I do look back and think, you know, if this had happened, if the COVID event had happened, because I'd retired by then, if COVID event had happened when I was still working as a practicing psychologist in the NHS, would I have shouted up? Now, I think I would. I like to think I would, but maybe you don't know until you're in that, because I think the level of criticism and like I said, cancellation and smearing that people have endured and are still enduring, I think it's just off the scale. It's nothing like we've seen ever in my lifetime anyway. So I think that's probably the main reason, in my view, why people don't, you know, more people haven't spoken up.
So they could hold the same views, but they're just not bold enough to speak out.
Yes, yeah. And that's why I'm very into having conversations with people. I don't always manage to follow my own guidance, I have to say, about keeping calm. You know, people don't change their minds by being told that they're idiots or criticised. But we've all been there. Affect gets the better of us, and and we say things. But I'm all for having conversations with individuals who are on the other side, if you like, who have followed the pro-narrative. And I think there are more and more opportunities to do that, and people are feeling more able to speak out bit by bit. It's what I'm finding at the moment. So, I would encourage, if you do get any teachers who are ambivalent, who might just say something that at least sounds slightly sceptical, I think that's a cue to have a conversation, get interested, get curious about their perceptions and what gives them that bit of ambivalence about what's going on, and then find a bit of common ground. Once you've found a bit of common ground that you can agree on, there's usually something, start to dribble other bits of info around the edges, because they might then be more receptive to taking it on board.
Hi, I just wanted to ask, you mentioned Delve, but you didn't say anything about Independent Sage, and I'm just wondering what influence they had, if at all. I mean, because I got the impression that they were really trying to push masks more than anyone, along with Delve, obviously.
That's a fair point. I think it's Independent Sage were one of the most vocal pro-narrative groups. And an interesting fact on Independent Sage that you may not know, remember me talking about SPIB, the subgroup of SAGE, the behavioural scientists? In around June 2020, 8 members of the SPIB defected to the Independent Sage and then participated in the criticism of government policy. I think the reason why they could have well been on my list of culpable groups, because I agree with you, I think they've been awful through the COVID event, absolutely. Very, very vocal, very kind of openly hostile to sceptical viewpoints. But I suppose they were critical, openly critical of a lot of government policies. And I think the perception of them by your Patrick Valences and others was pretty negative, understandably in a way, because they constantly were criticising, what was coming out of SAGE and what policies were coming out of the government. So I think that's probably one of the reasons why I don't think they were as pivotal, certainly, than Delve, who were clearly saying the right things, clearly had a communication channel with the higher echelons of SAGE, and therefore had quite a lot of influence. But it's all about opinions, and Independent Sage would be certainly up there as one of the major mouthpieces of the dominant narrative, including mass. I agree with you.
Hi Gary, thank
Hello.
you very much for that. I've got a question because I've heard a rumour, so I want to ask you about this. But I've heard a rumour that this ultimately came largely from the Biden administration in America, and they used this as a tactic to win the election, and then they've used all their political influence to nudge other countries, such as the UK. It appears the SNP as well have been very much nudged and influenced by the Biden administration too. And yeah, that's almost the most sensible rumour that I've heard about that. So I just wondered what your thoughts were on that.
Yes, well, interestingly, I was chatting before this session tonight, if you'd have said something equivalent to that to me before 2020, I'd have gone, yeah, conspiracy theorist, But now I can well believe it, and we think mask is polarising in the United Kingdom.
Yeah,
in the US, it's even worse, isn't it? It's almost as if it's split almost perfectly across Democrat and Republican lines, hasn't it?
So, I just heard that people were using the masks almost as a symbol of being anti-Trump.
Yes.
And they wanted everyone to know that they were anti-Trump.
Yes.
And that was a very obvious way of showing it. And
Well, you know as much about that, perhaps even more than I do. So, but I can well believe it, yes. And it has been like a political symbol for them. And masks are just, like I said, the most insidious They're so wrong on many different levels, not just being ineffective, but the psychological effects.
Yeah, because I work in academia, and I would talk to my colleagues about the still face experiments from the 1950s, and they all looked at me like I was from another. And just to add as well, working in academia, I'm about to leave, but I'm in a very fortunate position where I could do that, but I felt so incredibly isolated these last few years, not being able to speak to anyone, not just on this, but just on many of the different interventions. And there was groups like the Great Barrington Declaration, who was censored heavily, and all sorts were said about them. But yeah, just within the university that I work in, it was really difficult to know who to speak to. And it was actually easier just to be isolated, just to stay away. And I was using the phrase mask excuse for not attending events, but partly because I just didn't want to be in groups where the research that was being discussed and published was just absolute nonsense, and you could not have sensible conversations with people about that.
Yeah. It must have been incredibly tough for people on the front line in academia and health, really.
And it's been huge, because I used to work in the government as well. And I realise now how very brainwashed people were in terms of being very pro-SMP.
Yes.
And all the messaging that has been going on for many, many years within this country in terms of pushing. And then you look at life expectancy in Scotland since the SNP's come in place. And it's, you see that, and that tells a million. That just tells the full story. And I say that to other people, and they're just really shocked because they think it's the opposite.
Yeah.
But it's here we just had the whole policy of whatever Westminster do, just do it harder, faster, longer. And there's absolutely no science in that.
Well, the level of propaganda in the Western world over the last few years has just been escalating. You know, like my pet interest, as I've said, is behavioural science, nudging. But that's just one element of the kind of propaganda weaponry. That's one kind of weapon in the armoury. There's lots of other types of propaganda, and alongside censorship and, like we said, smearing and cancellation. And it just triggered a thought really for me as you were talking there as well about, I think one of the other big barriers to getting more people to be sceptical, and from I think my perspective and many in here by the sound of it, to actually realise what's going on at the moment. I think a lot of people really struggle with the idea that our Western institutions, the ones that, shone a light on the world, that were a leading light for everybody else, beacons of democracy and all this, that these institutions may now be exploiting their own people. I think people struggle with that, as I struggle with that, and still do from time to time, because it does shatter your own, if you were like me, which I'm naive up until January, February 2020, head in the clouds, working hard, head down, work for your family, try and better yourself. Generally believing that there are incompetence around and a bit of corruption around the edges, but by and large our institutions were on our side. They were for us, weren't they? And all that was, for me, was shattered in early 2020. But I think a lot of people, which I can kind of understand, still find it difficult to contemplate that there has been that.
Yeah, no, but thank you so much for speaking up again on this, for all these years, because it's been hugely inspiring.
Gary, thanks very much for a very insightful talk, and the word delve will be forever ingrained in my memory, and the sense of anger and rising hatred. Anyway, do you think, what's your sense that the public at large have kind of got this now and have cottoned on to what was done to them? And do you think when the powers that be try it again in whatever form that might take, do you think there'll be more resistance next time round, or do you think we'll be as equally gulled as we were last time because of these techniques that you describe?
Really good question, and it's the real central one, isn't it? I have some optimism, I have to say. My sense, and it's hard to judge really, because I probably operate in a echo chamber a lot of the time, as we do, don't we? We find like-minded people, and sometimes it's hard to judge what the general population might be thinking. But after saying that, more and more I'm seeing people willing to express dissent, visible dissent. And that's a real positive and encouraging thing. It's not happening fast enough. We might not have reached the crucial threshold level for it to successfully resist another onslaught, but I think it's getting there. Yeah. There is a view, and I find it plausible, that all you need to stop top-down, tyrannical, authoritarian stuff being imposed on people is to have something in the region of 15 to 20% of the population who express visible dissent. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean screaming and with a placard and walking down the street. It might mean that, and power to the elbow for that. We need those. But what it means is people in everyday conversations taking every opportunity, at the hairdressers, in the pub, with family members, when the opportunity arises, to express scepticism, criticise what's gone on. And I'm hearing this personally, I hear this more and more. And this is with strangers, by the way, so this is not with people who know my views, I'll tell you, a couple of anecdotes of this, which I think are positive and uplifting, because I think we need that, don't we? We need optimism. And, I've lived on my avenue now for this particular place for a good 10 years, so obviously predates the COVID event. And I've seen this couple who live directly opposite me, and we nod to each other in the mornings like you do, but nothing more. The odd casual conversation. But I found out about 6 months ago that this couple were hugely sceptical from the start, and actually been reading some of the stuff, including my own, which was really interesting. They lived across the road, and I didn't know that they held sceptical views. I was in the hairdressers, getting the old grey hair chopped off the time before last it was. And the hairdresser, don't know her particularly well, cutting away. And I don't know, she definitely brought this up, I didn't. She started talking about vaccination and said, she said, my hubby refused to get vaccinated. And I said, oh, did he? Oh. I said, I opted out. Well, I didn't. Oh? Yeah, she says, a lot of side effects. My husband had this, and that was a conversation, opportunity. You can then share a bit more info. Me and Dave Charanblue, some of you might know, probably pronounced his surname wrong, but he's a guy who does a lot of stuff around how to influence people in a good way, how to actually talk to people, how to change minds. I was in the pub with him last week because he stayed over at our house. And we were just chatting away, talking shop probably in the pub, and there were these two young women sat on the table next to us. And as we were talking, I noticed one of the lassies keep going, like this, having a listen. Didn't know them. So eventually I looked at her and she went, sorry, she said, but yeah, I've just finished my sociology degree at Manchester University, she said. And I'm beginning to doubt a lot of this agenda that that's been pushed at us over the last few years. And I've had a lot, I could go on, there's other examples. I'm picking up that people are more willing to express visible dissent, and I think that's so important. People show visible dissent. It's no good hiding behind an icon on social media, anonymous one. That's limited value. You've got to put your name to it, with family, with friends. Not be nasty, because that's counterproductive, although we all fall into that trap, I have, I'm sure others have. But, just take every opportunity just to try and connect with people, really. Find a bit of common ground. You can usually find something that you can use as a base, as a foundation. Not throw something out that's too far away from where that person is at that moment in time, because that's never going to work. Do you get what I mean? If somebody's really kind of very pro-narrative, then you're not going to persuade them by throwing out something that's very kind of skeptic. You need to be down here, just drip feeding bits that are a bit more along the continuum, trying to get them curious in finding out more. and seeing whether they can move along the spectrum a bit. Very difficult to do in practice, but well worth the effort, I think. So that was a long answer to, I think there is optimism, and I think as for whether it's sufficient at this point, if the pandemic industry tomorrow said another terrible virus, going to kill millions, lock down, get your mask back on, I'm pretty sure there'd be more resistance to that. Pretty sure. Whether that would stop it happening altogether, I don't know. Do you have a view?
I kind of like to live in optimism, and I agree with you when you kind of talk to folk and so anecdotally you get a sense, and even a meeting like this, I've been in the world of awake conspiracies going back to the 90s, and the idea like 10 years ago you could have a meeting like this would just have been inconceivable in Edinburgh, but here we are, so I think there is waking up, and I definitely agree with you, it needs face-to-face conversations. I think social media is a waste of time, and actually is quite damaging, to your own mental health. But face-to-face meetings and conversations like this are definitely important. And I kind of going to demonstrations. So there's a big one, hopefully a big one on Monday, outside the Parliament, 1:30 to protest against the Hate Speech Act. And okay, it may not make a difference, but if there's a big number, like a few thousand rather than a few hundred, as people expect, that may have an impact. People will notice. Professor Sridhar and the like will walk less confidently in the halls of academia and power, and we need those people to start being afraid, because one thing that really gets in my throat is the total lack of accountability of these people that are named up there. They're walking. They're still media darlings. They've had no sanction, no shame. Absolutely no shame, and that I think that's very wrong. These people should be very, very ashamed, at least.
Thank you for that. My understanding from what you said is that until the pandemic turned up, you weren't really aware of any agenda, global or otherwise, with all its features. Totally compromised, people promoted, institutional capture, and you're aware of that now. I would wonder if you care to develop that idea a bit further. What's your understanding of the world now, how it's controlled and who controls it, compared to, say, 5 or 10 years ago or whenever before? I guess COVID was maybe a bit of an epiphany for you. You saw the world differently after that. And so how are you seeing it now? Like, is this issue in your mind just confined to this kind of medical, biological sphere, or is it much, much bigger? And where's your mind going, and how has this revelation affected you personally? From that comfortable world where you believed in the institutions and you believed in goodwill and you believed that people were promoted on competence, and in fact, that's only part of the story, and sometimes it's not part of the story.
To the globalist agenda, I think this is worldwide, this has been coming for a while. I think there are a lot of powerful globalist institutions, whether we talk about World Economic Forum, the World Bank, the World Health Organization to some extent, but I think they're mainly a mouthpiece. I think they're relatively low down the food chain with the globalists. They're under control of the globalists, but I'm not sure how much influence they have on their own. So I certainly have had to absorb the fact that we are being controlled by globalist forces. I think by the elite, and they might be millionaires or billionaires, different families that have a lot of money, the ones that meet in the private jets at Davos, those kinds are trying to siphon off more and more of the wealth at the expense of ordinary people. And I've kind of had to accept that just from the reading that I've done since the beginning of 2020. Drug companies, which my kind of antipathy to drug companies goes back much further than 220, because working in mental health, I saw them in operation, and they were clearly the most corrupt industry, and have been for decades. And that's not conspiracy theory, that's not speculative. If you just forget about the allegations against the drug companies, if you just look at the conviction sheets of the big drug companies like Pfizer, they've got a conviction sheet in front, found guilty in a court of law going back, to 50s, 60s, with words about, found guilty of, bribing stakeholders. That's a legal term. One of the, for Pfizer, I think it was, bribing stakeholders, pushing a dangerous antidepressant at the children's market. Drug companies have been up to the neck in this for a while. So yes, I've had to absorb the broad principle, I guess, that these global institutions have far, far too much power and control, and our national boundaries and national governments, I think, have been relegated down the list of kind of influencers, really. They have very little power. I think all the power is there. I'm still learning about that. I'm sure people in this room know more about that because they've been aware of it for longer than I have. And I'm always willing to learn more about it. As for the impact on my life, to realise that we couldn't trust these institutions, I was talking to somebody earlier today, that does shatter your world. It really does unsettle you. All the things I've believed, you start to doubt, And I don't want to use the term down a rabbit hole, although people suggest I already am. Like they often say, what is it? Something about today's, what's the difference between a conspiracy theory and the truth? They used to say, usually about 6 months or something, which I think is very true, isn't it? And we can all produce examples of that. But yeah, and there's still periods where I do find it unsettling, and I don't believe anything these days. I hear things on the television, whether it's about climate, pollution, finance, digital IDs, you name it. I see news items with some footage, a big bridge collapsing, for instance, and I start thinking, is that real? Has that actually happened? I've made some new friends. I've lost others, but I've made some new friends who are on a similar wavelength. Some of them believe, more suspicious about what's going on than me. I'm still kind of, struggling with one or two things. I've managed to accept that, Kennedy wasn't shot by a lone assassin. I've accepted that one. Yeah. So I've certainly put that one to bed. And the 9/11, again, I've got really kind of significant suspicions about whether that happened the way it was said. Moon landings. I've got doubts. I've got doubts. I won't name him because he might not want to be named, but there's a very kind of well-known academic who knows a lot more about these things than I, and has studied things like 9/11 far more thoroughly than I have. And he's absolutely certain that did not happen the way it was described. So, so I'm wobbling there, and it's uneasy because it's just that day-to-day experience, and I can see from people nodding that I'm not alone. You see something on telly and you go, can I believe that? Should I believe that? And I don't want to disbelieve everything because something must be true, something must be happening. But why have they shown that now at this moment? So I'm constantly questioning, which is an uncomfortable place to be.
I think at the beginning of 2020 was when people became critical thinkers. I certainly did, thanks to a retired gaffer of mine who phoned me up and said, if you want to become mask exempt, phone up the NHS and tell them that you might have pleural thickening of the lungs. Now, I'm a welder to trade. At the time, some of the exotic materials that I weld had just come to light that it was carcinogenic. So I phoned up NHS 24. I said I would like to go for an X-ray for pleural thickening of the lungs. Can I become mask exempt? And they said yes, which I thought was fantastic. So the word went around the trades offshore. Phone up and say you think you've got pleural thickening of the lungs. Okay. So, funny, it was a retired senior weld inspector that called me and told me this. And I find that offshore there's a lot of critical thinkers, and there has to be. Going to the reference of the pharmaceuticals, with the Carnegies and the Rockefellers putting oil into patent medications. I think that was at the turn of the 1890s that happened, because
after 1910.
1910 they couldn't get rid of oil. You know, there was abundance, and there's still an abundance of oil. This fossil fuels is total baloney, yes. I think it's the second most abundant liquid on the planet. Yeah, water first. And there's over 150 years of oil in the North Sea using today's technology. Okay, so... Okay. On occasions, I have to wear an N59 mask. I tried wearing, we used to get the air-fed masks when they first came out, costing a couple of £1,000, and they weighed half a ton. Okay, so I actually got a neck problem off of wearing these air-fed masks, okay? And I ended up having to go to a chiropractor for 18 months to sort the problem out. So I was then exempt from having to wear an air-fed mask, which health and safety didn't really like, okay? You must wear it. And I said, no, here's a letter from my chiropractor, which in the 1985, I think it was in America, the pharmaceuticals were found guilty of calling chiropractors quackery. Yeah, and that was an actual court case. So yes, I had great pleasure telling my doctor that the chiropractor I was seeing was doing wonders for my neck problem. So as soon as the masks came out, and I made myself exempt, and you saw all these people walking about with surgical masks on, I knew that an N95 or an FFP2 or 3 were the minimum specification to stop viruses. So then people were saying, oh, I've bought an N95, and I enjoyed saying to them, did you have a face fit test? And they're going, face fit test? What's a face fit test? I said, I've worn N95s for the last 37 years on occasions when I have to. And you must have a face fit test with the mask to ensure that it fits correctly. And no one was aware of any of this, you know. And then you saw the people walking about with a face mask, not even covering their nose. And I said, you know, your mask must be just as good as the pixie dust on my sunflower lanyard. That's all I have to say. I'm sorry that I missed you earlier. I was up at the taxi rank waiting for the place to open, yes. So I hope that I get to see you again sometime soon. Okay.
Hi, Gary. Thanks for a great talk. Having studied psychology myself, I was really interested in hearing your side on it. I was in education when the lockdowns happened and subsequently went back and all the children were masked up, and it was the reason I left education, because it was so horrific. I didn't wear a mask, and I was like the lady behind me, the teacher. Yeah, I mean, literally people avoided me like the plague, you know, walking down the corridor, you know, teachers would, and it was awful. I actually quite enjoyed it, to be honest, though. It wasn't really a big deal to me. I used to smile and everybody could see my smile, you know, and I was working in a communications provision for young people who had difficulties communicating, and they wanted to put us in masks. And I was just, for me, was the most frustrating time in all the jobs that I've done. And I was just about to say about the exemption, that was my saviour, because that got me out of wearing a mask, basically. And, you know, I remember going into the head teacher one day, because I came in, no matter, where's your mask? And I was like, well, I'm exempt. All right, okay, what's your exemption? I said, well, I don't have to disclose that to you. Do you know? Oh, well, yeah, I think actually, I said, no, I don't have to. Oh, are you unwell? I was like, well, I will be if you continue to keep questioning me. Do you know what I'm... So that was my question is, I mean, I actually used the anxiety thing. I said it was making me really anxious. I said my young people can't communicate with me, so they're also anxious. I was dealing with quite challenging behaviour, etc., so that was just making it 10 times worse. So my question is, where did the exemption thing come from? I take it that was across the board, England and Scotland. Do you know who decided what the exemptions were to be? Because I know there was people on the, you know, using all sorts of things, but yeah, I used the anxiety card, and it worked well for me, do you know? But where did that, who decided?
I don't know, if I'm honest. I don't know who determined, maybe somebody in the room does, who determined what counts as an exemption criterion and what doesn't.
Because I tried to get everybody to use it and they just weren't having it, do you know? They were just like, I was like, but do you genuinely like to be in that state? Do you know?
Yeah, I never wore one, but like I said, I wasn't in mainstream work then, but I never wore one. I got challenged a number of times. My pet response was, I've got good reasons not to. That's all I used to say. I think nothing specific. I've got good reasons not to. And if they wanted a conversation, I'd say, well, they don't work, etc., etc., blah, blah, blah. But I ran a train in Vienna with 3 other sceptical friends, parked the car on the outskirts, travelling in by the train into the centre. And it was the time when there were still mask mandates in Italy. Venice, sorry, we're in Venice. In Italy, there were still mask mandates on transport. So we got on this train, 4 of us, no mask. Packed train, everybody else, all masked up. And we sat there. We got away with the inward trip, but on the way back, this couple opposite us, masked up, an oldish fella and a younger woman, started going, oh, put the mask on, put the mask on. We go, we don't wear them, don't wear them. We don't wear them. And the friends were going, oh, we're exempt. You know, carried on. What you call them, the guard, when he came past, kind of went, don't wear them. And he walked off. Apparently satisfied, I think he'd done his job, you know, and he didn't want any hassle, you know. But these 2 passengers persisted, and eventually the woman got up and flounced to the guard to go and tell on us that we were unmasked. And then the announcement in English came over the tannoy system saying everybody must wear a mask, But anyway, we were getting off at the next stop anyway, and I did resist the temptation to give the finger as we were getting off. So I was really tempted to be really juvenile, but I managed to resist and just smiled and got up. But I've been challenged, but my pet response has always been, I've good reasons not to.
Well, thank you very much for your talk. That was a nasty reminder of what we've been through. Well, I was just going to say, we have to kind of go through as many rabbit holes as we can before they throw another pandemic on our heads. And one of the essential ones as well is to debunk virology. Because the whole story of virology is another scam, starting with my compatriot Louis Pasteur, who just pretended that he had found lots of viruses that were pathogenic. And on his deathbed, he kind of said, oops, I'm sorry, that was all a mistake, The terrain theory of his contemporary Antoine Béchamp was saying, no, it depends of how your body health is in. That's why you're going to be healthy or not healthy. And viruses are only debris of the cells, And that's all. There is no pathogenicity. There is no transmission. There is no infection. All this is just lies. There is a guy called Paul Lanka, a German guy. He's offered, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of pounds to anybody that would debate with him the fact that there is no viruses. Anyway, there are many very famous doctors that just can explain better than I could that virology, it's a virology. Okay, it's a lie. So we need to go through that because that will give us a lot more confidence in any time they throw anything at us and throw lockdown or whatever, to have the confidence and to be standing in our sovereignty of making decisions for our own body and not being the prey of this kind of tactics of, you have to save your granny's life, you have to protect the collectivity. No, truth will protect the collectivity. And we start by just studying, learning as much as we can, supporting each other as much as we can into our sanity. And like that, we can't debunk the climate change, we can't debunk the 5G lies, we can't debunk, all the kind of political things that they throw in our planet to kind of be, to advance further and to awake as best as we can. Period. Yeah. End of round. Thank you.
I'm a member of the Health Advisory and Recovery Team, HART, you may have heard of. And the biological scientists on there, I won't name any names, but they argue incessantly about the existence or not of viruses. Some people would agree with you in HART, some wouldn't. And they do have these very interesting debates. So obviously it's not my particular area of expertise, but I listen with interest the debate.
Well, I think we've only a limited time here, so we have to finish the questions here. I'd just like to thank Gary ever so much for giving a really very, very thorough giving us a very, very thorough investigation of exactly who was responsible for these mask mandates. And it seems to come back to Devi Sridhar so many times, doesn't it? Yeah, a member of the same institute, same organisation. Yeah, I've had my own experiences of masks at the university. I went in for the first meeting when postgraduate students came back, and we had a face-to-face meeting, and they were all wearing masks. And I went berserk, and I told them, what the heck are you wearing a mask for? You're a young person. If there is a virus, you're not at any danger at all. And they look kind of, but we're just, because... it's because it's kind to other people. That's the only argument they had, because it's kind to other people. And next meeting we had, they didn't have any masks on. So you can do something about it. But this also went on with my colleagues as well. So I remember going into a meeting with a postgraduate student and 3 other members of the committee. And they walked in with masks on, sat down, took the masks off. And of course, that's been trained to do that in pubs, of course, earlier on. And I was so annoyed by this, and I told my wife that next time I was going to take in a jester's hat. And I was going to put on the jester's hat and then take it off when I sat down. She persuaded me not to do that because I think I would have fallen out forever with those colleagues. But the level of, these are supposed to be top academics. The amount of brainwashing, and they could have they needn't have done that. They wouldn't have lost their jobs over doing that. I think they're just spineless, personally. So, anyway, that's my rant over. And I'd just like to thank Gary for stimulating that rant, and also for stimulating all these questions that have come and giving us great insight as to what's gone on. Thank you very much indeed.